Hey guys, Chris Dyer here. Today, I've got this game here, AFL Premiership 2007. So, I purchased this game many years ago for the PlayStation 2, and still to date for me it's the best AFL game ever made. My opinion, of course, but what I really liked about the game was the career mode. So, you could be basically the list manager of a team, you could make the trades, you could draft the players. So it's really simulating a season, but then you go on and keep going for another up to, I believe it's 25 years. So, and having played the game as much as I did growing up, well, I've got a pretty good idea from those 2007 lists who would I want to go forward with. So, who would be my ultimate best 22? Who would be, if I could create a whole list of 40 senior listed players for rookies, who would be those guys for me? So, and in looking at those players, I think there's quite a number of valuable list management lessons to go through as well. So I'll share some of those as well in the video. So let's have a look. So the way I formulated my team is as follows. So I basically I'll list out all the players that I would consider if I was to create a team moving forward from 2007. I've gone with their game totals. I've gone with this indicator here to suggest they're still active players if they are. And then I've also got their draft positions and their years that they were drafted. So the straightforward obvious ones, Selwood and Pendlebury, the two most games played, and they're among the most valuable midfielders over the period of time, so they'll be on everyone's list, particularly given they're still active. That's a bonus on top of all that. So the value here, so we can look at, well, Cade Simpson, so one of the best general defenders, even outside players you could describe him as, over the last sort of 10 or so years. And and look, he's had that success, but you didn't need to pick him early. So it's a good example in going through that, well, you don't need to take general defenders early, and we still see that now, and you get mature age defenders getting picked with rookie picks, late picks. So just, again, another of those examples adding fuel to the fact that you don't need to go first round for a general defender. And this is why I've had that bias over the years towards not necessarily wanting to overpay for general defenders or just, I guess, okay outside players. So Heath Shaw, father-son, Eddie Betts, so one of the best small forwards. And again, at this time, so in 2007, well, Cyril was yet to be drafted yet, so he wasn't obviously able to be considered for this list. But Eddie Betts, based on all these guys, is the, I guess, premier crumbing forward that over that duration of time would be the guy that you'd absolutely pick for that sort of role. And then if we look at, well, who are the other sort of later draft guys? Well, Justin Westhoff. So he's an interesting case. We're 2 years older than his peers, so that allowed him to be picked up quite a bit later. So it shows that you really need to be looking out for those, I guess, mature ages, or those that are just a few years older than their drafts crop, I suppose, because, look, you can get him quite a lot later and get tremendous value, because Westhoff playing this many games from really this point onwards, well, fantastic career, well done. And he was someone where he was still skinny, and look, he did take a little while to develop, but then, really good player and just kept improving. So he's one of those cases where you just have to look at the growth trajectory, which is one of the places where I guess I learnt that from as well, and sort of helped figure that sort of idea out. So Hawkins, father-son, fair enough. So other players of interest, so Josh Kennedy, so he's someone where, from a list management perspective, well, for Hawthorn, he wasn't getting the games because the Hawthorn midfield was terrific. So what happened, he was traded to Sydney, and then he absolutely took off and became really that, I guess, number one contested ball winner, first possession guy at stoppages for Sydney. So, and that's the case sometimes, where you can have guys that are absolutely really excellent players, but sometimes they just don't get the opportunities. So that's something to absolutely be aware of and really look out for. So you could look at the current time, or maybe that's a Josh Dunkley not necessarily getting the midfield minutes that he should, or there'll be other guys in reserves for teams. Then Jared Harbrow, again, general defender, but guess what? We only needed to use a rookie pick to get him. So, and given for list construction, well, there's, at the time in 2007, there were just the 4 rookie spots and 40 senior list spots. So Jared Harbrow will absolutely be one of those rookies as one of those standouts. And then Ablett, father-son, wasn't necessarily great early, but from 2007, absolutely took off and became an absolute jet and really the premier midfielder. And also, I should mention, those that I have underlined, they're the players that actually made my team of, I guess you could say 44, including the rookies. And why wasn't Paddy Ryder listed? So, very unlucky, but there's a pretty obvious reason, and that reason is Todd Goldstein. So, if you've got Goldstein and he plays every game every year, well, what's the practical benefit of having a Paddy Ryder there? Well, there isn't really one. So... and that's the case sometimes, where it's just you really need to look at from a best 22 perspective. Well, is there a way to possibly fit them into my team? So, and and if I was to say, is Ryder one of the 40 best that you'd go forward with? Well, absolutely. But yeah, again, if I can get a Goldstein, probably don't need a Ryder. So, yeah. And then Kieran Jack, rookie pick. So, yeah, obviously came from more of a rugby background, picked out of New South Wales, and yeah, I think his father may have been a rugby player, so so that sort of enabled him to sort of be rookied and picked a bit later because he wasn't really that natural footballer at that time necessarily. Goldstein, well, once he really got into the senior team, well, he's been really the reliable ruckman, and that's the thing with ruckman. This is something that's really valuable, where if you've got a ruckman that you can rely on, will play 22 games every year, won't miss a game. And Brodie Grundy sort of, I guess, a few years on from that sort of draft when he was picked, well, here's the same story. He really takes after a Goldstein, where, yeah, some might argue maybe a Max Gawn is a little better, but I'd take Brodie Grundy every day because you can rely on him to play 22 games. And Grundy's someone where he's 3 years younger than Gawn, yet he's already played more games. So they're the types you really want, where if you can get a ruckman that does that, a key defender that you can rely on to play every game, well, that's the ultimate. So, and it means you don't need to waste as many list positions on depth. So, and every list position, you really want someone who can either contend or is outright a best 22 standard player. So, that's what you really want. You want the strongest best 22 possible. So, the more list positions you have available, well, that's of great value. So then Heath Grundy, and at this time it was interesting, there weren't many great key defenders in terms of those young ones that we could really say that were available on 2007 lists. It was really a lot of the veterans that were great, and then from, I guess, the 2007 draft, that's when we really got your Rances, your Harry Taylors, all those really great sort of key defenders. So key defenders were hard to pick in terms of those, I guess, long-term best guys. But yeah, Heath Grundy, I thought, yeah, look, is one of those guys, and guess what? He's a key defender, and he was picked up in the rookie draft. So, again, you can get key defenders sometimes as rookies. So, other players of interest. So, you've got Sam Mitchell. So, he was drafted 1 year older than his peers. Had a great year in the VFL for, I believe he was Box Hill Hawks at that time as well. And so picked up for Hawthorn, pick 36, and yeah, tremendous value. So. And here's a case of, well, he may not have tested great in terms of athletic testing or stood out in those respects, but great footballer. So, and my finding with a lot of really great midfielders is a lot of them drop out of the first round and can get to that sort of 40-ish mark. And Sam Mitchell's another of those where he didn't necessarily have that mainstream demand that he really should have got. So, so that's something you often see. And then you've got Matt Priddis again. Well, one of the really good midfielders, Brownlow medalist, and he was picked 2 years older than his peers. Again, not an athlete, but obviously tremendous ball winner. So another rookie pick, but worthy rookie pick, and absolutely has had a tremendous career. So yeah, he would have been a great pick. So again, a lot of these late value picks, rookie value picks, they're mature ages. So maybe that should be a bit of a hint to recruiters. Maybe you need to look at some of these guys who are just that little bit older, because that's where you tend to get the value, and you also tend to get the highest proportion of games. So in terms of those late picks, or the highest likelihood of playing games. So if you get that and the highest upside, well, it's pretty obvious that that's the direction more of that time should be dedicated to. Which is why I would recommend to all recruiting departments, put more time into mature ages, and I'd also say as a separate point, put more time into opposition talent ID, because there's guys that are underutilized on every list that can add value to your best 22 just as mature ages can. So Robbie Gray, picked later. Again, he's sort of that forward mid, but yeah, picked later. Great talent at the time, but yeah, he just hadn't quite put it all together. But developed into a tremendous player, obviously. And then Corey Enright, again, probably the best general defender we've really seen since 2000. And absolutely, he's someone where, again, picked sort of mid to late-ish draft. So, yeah, phenomenal. So picked after pick 40, and yeah, and again, still today. And look, 1999 drafting wasn't perfect. It was reasonable. It wasn't perfect. But again, you can still get really good defenders later in the draft. So you don't have to waste early picks on them. You can if they're the clear best available, fair enough, but you don't have to go early. It's not a necessity if you want to get a good defender, because you can find them later. So Travis Cloke, obviously, it was terrific for a period of years there, but yeah, unfortunately, he just didn't have that, I guess, extended period of career, which is why, yeah, unfortunately, I had to leave him off this list. Maybe you could argue that, look, maybe you'd have him for a short period, move him after some of his prime years, make a profit in terms of, I guess, high picks, remove some of that salary cap space to re-sign your other guys. And fair enough, you could absolutely do that. That would be one really very much viable strategy in terms of this list build, but that wasn't quite the direction I went, just because there are quite a number of other key forwards where they're pretty much the same sort of standard performance, but they've been able to do it over a longer period. Because you can be great, but you want to be great for a long period. That's really what separates the really great from just the very good. So that's sort of where I sort of see that separation there in my mind. So again, Matthew Boyd, so rookie pick, but guess what? He was 1 year older than his peers. So again, don't dismiss those overages. There's value there. So Risky Tally, late draft, good midfielder. So, and midfielders, particularly inside midfielders early in the draft, they typically sort of work at a high hit rate if they're really strong contested ball winners. But still, you can find them in any portion of the draft. But of course, would he be considered in terms of, for I guess, an ultimate team of 40? Well, no, not realistically. Hooley, so you got the later career value. That's why I've really included him. And look, he's still playing, so he can still add to that game's total. So Ferrito, rookie draft. So again, great career, but again, rookies. So you can get some value guys as rookies. Brett Harvey, smaller types. So yeah, you can get your smaller types and you don't have to necessarily go early. And really, Brett Harvey's one of the more curious players where you don't get many sort of, I guess you could say, he's probably sub 170. I know he was probably listed later in his career at about 172. Whether he was that or not's debatable. But yeah, look, you can get those, I guess you could call them some sub 175s, and you don't have to spend too much all the time to get them. So you can look at a Caleb Daniel where, look, you can get those guys and you don't have to overpay. So if they're good enough footballers, well, yeah, they're absolutely viable to pick. And a Josh Gibson, well, he was a rookie pick, and he was someone where, look, he was drafted by North Melbourne, traded to Hawthorn, then he got unlocked. So again, opposition talent ID. So you really have to be looking at those state league teams, looking at the reserves, really know every list up and down, every single player. That's absolutely vital. And again, Mark Lacroix, one of the really good small forwards. And again, you didn't need a first round pick to get him, so you don't need to overpay for him. Dale Morris, key defender, rookie pick, 4 years older than his peers. So again, look for mature ages. That's where you can really get value as rookies. Swallow, again, as I was saying before, mid-draft you can get really good midfielders, and Swallow was a good midfielder. Again, not someone you'd probably have in your 40, but yeah, he was absolutely valuable. Lindsay Thomas, small forward, good player. And again, a late-ish pick, so you don't have to go early. Sam Jacobs, ruckman, taken as a rookie, and he'd be absolutely, and he was rookie listed at this time, so in terms of one of those 4 rookie slots, he's someone you absolutely have to lock in. And if you've got a Goldstein as your number 1 ruck, and you've got Jacobs as, I guess, your backup ruck who you can call on if a Goldstein's injured, well, that's pretty well, in my view, the perfect combination. So Michael Johnson, good key defender, preseason draft, but again, 1 year older than his peers, so keep looking out for them. Swan, late pick, so again, midfield value late. Patfull, rookie pick, so again, general defender, you don't need early picks to get him, you can really find that sort of value late. Jaron Geary, so rookie pick, more value there. So Tom Lonergan, here's an interesting one. So
he was picked 23, but then in the 2006 draft, well, he was sort of, I guess, re-rookied due to sort of a terrible kidney injury. And it's incredible, really, from then how he came back and really became an even better player and really transitioned from an inconsistent key forward, I would have described him, to really one of the premier key defenders in the competition. So if you can get that guy as a rookie, well, yeah, you take him as a rookie, and then you don't really need to spend too much time on a lot of these really at this time sort of mediocre younger key defenders. So yeah, and then you've got a Sanderlands, well, again, rookies. So a lot of the great ruckmen come as rookies, and you'll see the same coming up here. Dean Cox, rookies. So you've got a lot of them. Malcheski, defender, late pick. You don't have to go early. So Goods, mid-draft. So tremendous value there. Really phenomenal. Watson, father-son. Dempster, father-son. Fair enough. Fisher, key defender, late pick, 3 years older than his peers. So again, same story. And Brian Harris, or became Brian Lake, but he was named Brian Harris in this game, so I will list it as that for those purposes. But yeah, again, drafted 1 year older than his peers, picked late. So yeah, you need to keep looking out for those guys. And even today, you get those key defenders that you can get late, rookie. Often if they're older, you can get them in those sorts of cases. So, and even the draft after this, well, you had a Harry Taylor. So he was picked up, and he would have been a couple of years older than his peers. And I know he was picked earlier, but yeah, maybe they sort of, AFL clubs might have learnt their lesson there and then. But so again, Cox I've mentioned, rookie, so you don't need to spend up early. Ryan O'Keefe, he was a good forward, a good midfielder. So again, late pick, you don't need to go super early all the time. Maxwell, defender, rookie. You can get him as rookies. Stephen Milne, crumbing forward, rookie. So, and both of these guys 1 year older than their peers. So again, these are clear blind spots that keep re-emerging every time we look at these picks. And again, these sort of things, these blind spots with recruiters keep happening today. And I'll do another video in the future on all the blind spots that I'm seeing from AFL recruiters, and where if we really look through all the drafts that we've had, we can really see a consistent pattern of, well, these are the blind spots. This is where we really need to see players of this type taken earlier, because there's tremendous value in these later parts of the draft, where frankly you could almost stock up on these types and really increase your percentages of success with these later picks. And then some of these where, look, Jard, Brown, Scarlett, they didn't play a lot of games, but what you can do with these types is really treat them as shorter term loans, where you can have them for a few years, and then when some of these other guys really develop, or you can move these guys on for salary cap relief and to really load up on early picks if you have to make those list spaces available. And that's the tricky thing with a list like this, where if you've got a whole list of capable players, well, how do you sort of free up those spaces? So with the veterans I chose that are really more those shorter term rentals, I really went with a bit of a leadership focus and the real value with having great leaders on your team is that it makes everyone better. They really enable the development of everyone on the list. So in theory, if you had all these guys together, they would be even better than the players that they actually became in real life. So that's one thing that I was highly cognizant of. So where I started with was, in terms of formulating a team, I really went for an ultimate list from the above players for sort of an ultra-term lookout. So I've got here Hearn. Well, you've got the kick, you've got the intercept marking, perfect. Jared Roughhead, so he was a key forward, but there weren't great key defence options. If I wanted an alternative, maybe it's James Frawley if I wanted someone who had a career as a key defender, but Roughhead for mine's a better player, and had he played as a key defender, my belief is he would have been the better key defender. And look, with upcoming drafts, if you have that, I guess, foreknowledge that there will be opportunities to get key defenders, or you notice in this upcoming draft there are a number of highly draftable key defenders, well then absolutely you can start drafting them in future years. But in terms of with the list as it's set up here and all the available players that were on AFL list at the time, I'd absolutely go with Roughhead, who actually did in his first couple of years spend time as a key defender. So that made me a bit more comfortable in making that pick, as well as his career was slightly shorter than a few of these key forwards. So I really went for the long-term value perspective, and I really wanted to have a premiership window really out to 2021, 2022 sort of stuff. So that was really the major aim in terms of this ultra long-term outlook, where if you can win 10, 11, 12, 13 premierships, well, you really want to extend that window out as long as you can, if you can. And in this case, well, if you've got the full AFL competition of lists to use, well, absolutely you can. And Cade Simpson, well, again, finished his career at the end of 2020, perfect. He's in that window. Rough Eddie played till, would have been about 20, he would have retired a year or two ago. So it's just, yeah, absolutely is someone where, yeah, you can have him there. Hodge just retired, perfect. And again, leadership value. And you've got leadership value from Hearn, leadership value from Hodge. Simpson was a good veteran. So that's a bit of a trend that I was really looking for here with this sort of group. And Heath Grundy, really good key defender. But again, he's someone where he really had that lasting power. Heath Shaw had the lasting power, only he's just retired now. So fantastic. And he's someone where he's underrated as a leader, and there's a bit of nuance to a Heath Shaw's leadership, whereas very much a vocal leader, but he's someone where really if you don't have the leaders around, he's that vocal voice that can give direction, but there is some of that clash factor. But in terms of, I guess, the duration of career, consistency of career, he's someone where just on quality you include him, and look, if he's a pain, well, you can always trade him. So, and it's a bit the same with Goddard, where just having that long, sustained period of success, having an impact for so long, again, he's someone where you really need him on your team. So, and again, same story as a Heath Shaw. And look, Goddard and Shaw both were guys where in big moments, in big games on the grand final stage, they were huge. So you absolutely want them on your team. But look, again, if they're going to be a pain and they clash with other guys, well, look, you can always move them and get in other guys. So that's okay. And Selwood, again, great leader, long-term, absolute success. So, yep, he has to be. Josh Kennedy. So this Josh Kennedy is the West Coast version, and my opinion is with key forwards, if they've got the endurance and they've got the marking capabilities, you can play them on a wing. And that's my view here with Kennedy as a way to ensure that, well, then I can have a Jack Riewoldt, Buddy Franklin, Tom Hawkins all on the same team. Because their long-term value, you can't leave them out of the team. So it's really finding a way to ensure that the forward balance is right and the balance across the whole field is right. And by having all these guys on my list, the real benefit here is, well, in the years following on from 2007, we haven't really seen a great key forward that really is better than any of these guys. Like whether it's a Jeremy Cameron, a Tom Lynch, they might be around that sort of level or a bit below. So it's really just a way where it almost, I guess, future-proofs you based on the lack of great key forwards in the competition now. Because if you said today, who are the great key forwards? Well, there's no one that's an all-time great key forward at the moment. Like Hawkins was obviously terrific last year, and you've got a few others that are still going pretty well. But yeah, look, no one is like a champion key forward like you might say of a Nick Riewoldt, Matthew Pavlich, Jonathan Brown, Prime Buddy. Like, you don't really have those guys anymore. So that's why I really went heavy on key forwards, but I really put them in positions where it would still blend with the rest of the team. And with a Kennedy, even when he was drafted, well, his endurance was nearing a Nick Riewoldt, and in the beep he was about, I guess, 3 sort of beeps off a Nick Riewoldt. So look, that's fine. He's got that endurance where he can cover that ground, so that's fine, even at that young age. So you could train him up to play that position and be really good. And then a Burgoyne, well, you've got the ultimate versatility, and again, he's clutch, big game performer, and has the long-term performance, so you can put him anywhere. So absolute perfect sort of player to have in this sort of mix, where it just gives you options. And it's a bit the same with a Robbie Gray, where play him forward, play him midfield, he's having an impact, so terrific. And then Riewoldt, Hawkins, Buddy, you can't leave those guys out, as with Kennedy, they're just too good. Eddie Betts, small forward, terrific small forward, the absolute premier crummer. He's the guy you need, really, to, I guess, balance out this forward line a little bit so it's not too, I guess, tall-focused and tall-centric, and there is sort of a way to have enough pressure and enough ground level presence. And look, Buddy's good at ground levels, so he doesn't make you too tall. And again, a Jack Riewoldt, he's not a super tall key forward either. So for me, that just works, but yeah, it is sort of almost in the too tall category, but for me, it still works. Goldstein, he is the absolute outstanding ruckman for me over really the duration, where you can just rely on him. He'll play every game every year. So that's exactly what you want in your profile for a key forward. So, as your ruckman. And it would be the same with your defence. You really want as many reliable, every game, every season guys. So Cade Simpson, invaluable from that perspective. Heath Shaw, same story. So you really want those guys. Pendlebury, Ablett, they're absolute givens. And again, long-term, great success. So that's what you want. On the bench, so Mundy, Boak, Josh Kennedy. So this is the Sydney Josh Kennedy. So he'd obviously add more to the midfield. And then McVeigh. So, and with a lot of these guys, what I've done is there's a lot of versatility across all lines. So that's what really helps this sort of team, where you've got a McVeigh. You can put him back if you want. You can put him in the midfield. It gives you options. And then you've got a Mundy. So again, well, he's a tall ball-winning midfielder. But if you need to play him back, you need to play him across half forward, you can. So that's okay. And then the emergencies. So these are guys where, look, they didn't necessarily have the early career success or consistency. Like with the Higgins, he had the injuries, which hurt him for a number of years. And then more recently, he's been able to hold up. And then a Julian and Edwards, well, more in recent years when Richmond have exploded, they've exploded. So just being able to have that long-term value, guys that are still going in the AFL. Well, if you could pick guys in 2007 that you knew going into 2021 are still on AFL lists and still among the premier players in the competition, well, you have to take them. And if they're guys that will be, I guess you could say, small salary cap hold guys in that, I guess, shorter term, well, that's absolutely perfect because it gives you more flexibility with the other guys. And then is your 4 rookies. So if you've got Sam Jacobs as, I guess, your depth ruckman, well, you don't need more than 2 ruckmen on your list once you've got a Goldstein established. So that's absolutely perfect. And it means you can use all those other list positions to really see, well, can I upgrade my key defenders? Can I maybe get a few sort of crumbing pressure forwards? Or maybe can I get something on maybe the outside to improve what that dynamic might look like? So you can really focus in on those other positions and look for more flexible guys. And again, having guys like Higgins, Edwards, those guys bring a lot of flexibility to the table. So that makes them tremendously valuable when you've got all these stars everywhere. Well, if you can fit high-level players you can really just say, put them back, put them forward, put them through the midfield, put them outside, well, that's absolutely perfect. And then a Lonergan, well, it just gives you a little bit more, I guess, in terms of options for key defenders, where like say if you want to put a roughhead, whether it's forward, you could almost put him through the midfield, whereas that good at ground level where it just gives you those options. But yeah, you can put a Lonergan back and then you can have even like an extra key defender. So that's awesome. And with the Jacobs and Lonergan, I'd say they're probably the 2 most valuable rookies in the context of this sort of team. So yeah, that's perfect. And only really needing the one, I guess, senior list position initially, well, that's perfect. Kieran Jack, really good midfielder, not in the class of a lot of these other midfielders, but again, of the rookies, well, he was the clear standout. And then you've got a Harbrow, well, great defender. And look, he beats out Geary, where again, he's got another sort of 50 plus games on him and slightly better player. So for me, Harbrow's the 4th rookie pretty clearly. And then what I've done here to find out, well, who would be the other guys? Because a lot of these guys in 2007, they're not necessarily great players. So I've almost gone with, I guess, placeholders from the respect that, well, these guys in 2007, they're absolutely the top echelon of stars. So if you've got these guys where they're the absolute stars, you've got leadership amongst the group, well, it's going to mean that these guys, once they sort of get into their primes, they're going to be even better players than they actually turned out to be. So, and then look, once guys really come along, like let's say it's it could be a Jared Roughhead where he kicks his 75 goals or whatever it is in 2008, well, fine, then you can move on someone else. So it's really looking at, I guess, when these guys hit their primes, and then from there, you can consider, you don't have to move on these placeholders right away, but you look at, well, what's the salary cap position? And of course, I guess for this sort of concept, salary cap isn't really applicable, but yeah, it's just really to go through what are those optimal ultimate names, where if you could just have any guys on the list, who would you go with? So, and then a Heath Grundy. So who would be the ultimate short-term defenders? Well, I've got Brian Harris at the time, changed his name to Lake. Luke McFarlane. For me, they're the 1A, 1B of key defenders. So, and look, if you have those guys helping the likes of a Roughhead, a Grundy develop, well, they're going to learn to become great intercept marks and great one-on-one marks. So that's sort of really what you want. And what I look at as key defenders, where I want guys who are those elite intercept marks, even able to take your one-on-one marks, they're the guys that are really going to do damage and really, I guess, beat the other team up and be factors towards winning. And then Shannon Hearn, well, really in 2009 he came good. And look, who was the best general defender at the time? Corey Enright. Key forwards, can't leave out Nick Riewoldt. Matthew Pavlich, absolutely can't leave out. And again, Pavlich gives you optionality, so that's his real value. And same with Riewoldt. You can play Nick Riewoldt. I'd have him as like a genuine wing, basically. So you could almost go Riewoldt in where Josh Kennedy is to start off with, and then you could go with a Matthew Pavlich in where Jack Riewoldt is. So, and with a Pavlich, well, you can put him in the midfield as well as a key forward. So again, options. Jimmy Bartell, well, Robbie Gray, he took a while to come good, so if you have a Bartell, that's phenomenal. Great midfielder, but you can play him forward or back. You got options. So, and this is the power of versatility, where if you've got a great team with a number of great players, this is when versatility really comes into its own, because you can really flex around those great players to ensure that you've got all those other spots in your best 22 covered, because that's ultimately what it comes down to. On grand final day, you've got 22 players you can take into the game, so you really want to have that optimized. And then if you've got a few guys behind them where they've got a bit of versatility to fill in, plug holes if there's an injury or what have you, well then that's absolutely the way to go. So Brett Harvey, he was the premier. You could really call him whether it's a general forward, key forward, that's really what you want. So then you've got here, so I'd have a Jonathan Brown in for a Tom Hawkins. So Jonathan Brown, from sort of 2008 to 2010, he was probably the best player in the AFL, it would be pretty reasonable to say, where he was just the dominant player, the dominant centre-half forward. So you'd absolutely, during those years, have him in your team, but really after 2010, well, you might as well move him on, because he's someone where he really had a very short prime compared to the likes of a Nick Riewoldt or a Matthew Pavlich. So his long-term value isn't as great, but his short-term value over that concentrated sort of 3-year period was phenomenal. And look, Tom Hawkins, when did he take off? I've actually narrowed it down to, it was round 17, 2011 that he came good. And then, of course, on grand final day against Collingwood in 2011, well, he went off. And from there, it was just, he really gained confidence going forward for the long run. But yeah, round 17, 2011, if you really look through all those games, really from that point onwards, he became a consistent, really good player, where before that, well, you weren't confident he'd mark it, where he'd just have really terrible hands, he'd just drop everything. So, yeah, he really became a good player from that point. Dean Cox, look, for me, he's the ruckman to start with, and he gives you a lot of options as well, where let's say a Goldstein comes good in 2010. Well, what you can do with a Dean Cox is you can put him, whether it's as a relieving ruckman where he plays just a few ruck minutes and he mostly plays forward, or maybe even on a wing as a tall wing who runs up and down the ground, takes intercept marks, goes forward and takes and grabs, hits the scoreboard. So it really gives you that optionality, whereas say someone like an Aaron Sandilands, who did play a few more years after a Cox, well, you can't really play a Goldstein with a Sandilands, because Sandilands, look, he's not a key forward. He can sort of have a few moments forward where he'll take a mark, maybe kick a goal, but just around the ground and in other roles, I don't necessarily see him giving you as many options as a Cox. So for me, a Sandilands is pretty unlucky from a short-term perspective, not to make my sort of final team, which you'll see in a moment. Then you've got a Travis Boak, so Dane Swan would be the short-term guy as that midfielder that would be in his place. And again, during those sort of years, from 2007 onwards, just a phenomenal midfielder. And then you can sort of, again, move him on any time. You'll get a huge profit, get picks back. So, and it's the same with all these sort of older guys as well. Sam Mitchell, so again, one of the great midfielders, and again, you've got the leadership factor as well. So he's going to make everyone better, make all the youth better. And once the youth start surpassing the veterans, well, just move them all out and on. So just given you've got so much quality and you won't have the salary cap space for everyone. So it's just about finding that balance over time. So, yeah, again, you've got the likes here of, you've got Deledio. Well, McVeigh wasn't quite there yet, but Deledio was great. And then, of course, very late in his career, he had lots of injuries. But really, before he became really injury prone, well, he was a 22-game-a-year, every-year guy. And again, versatility. So versatility helps. And Matthew Scarlett, well, you could play him key back, general back. So, again, great options. But again, great leader. So influential as a defender, so from a short-term perspective is someone to have, but then really you can move him on pretty quickly, given with the knowledge that we have that he didn't sort of get up to that 150 mark or anything like that. So it was really a shorter-term success from here, but in terms of what he was doing at that time, well, yeah, he's someone you'd absolutely want. And Adam Goodes, he was still an absolutely incredible player at this time, so he's someone you'd want. And again, what you've got here is an option. So let's say Dean Cox misses a game early days. Well, guess what? You can put an Adam Goodes in the ruck. You don't even need an Aaron Sandilands. And then you can put him as a key forward if you need a key forward. You can put him on a wing if you need a wing. So again, having that versatility of a champion player on a great team, that really adds a lot of value. And then, so a Joel Selwood, look, he was incredible from year one, but if you can have him as sort of an emergency year one, bring him in when you need to. And I noted here that Brendan Goddard, his last game for 2007 was round 7, so you just bring in Selwood. So that would be a way where, look, from year one, he's getting really regular games anyway. So you're not really losing out on development, assuming that he'd consider that first year helpful for his development, which really it was. So, but it just eases him in slightly. So I don't see any loss from that respect. And of course, well, at the time, Chris Judd, well, he was really in the lead up to 2007, I suppose you could say, the premier midfielder in the competition. And then really sort of 2007, I believe he might have had an injury and his year was a bit impacted, so he wasn't quite on that same level. But then, of course, 2008 came back, joined Carlton, and again, phenomenal in those early years where really he single-handedly carried Carlton, you could say. But yeah, again, having that leader, and look, he's not a vocal leader, but he's a lead by example. So he can really help all the young midfielders really become great. And look, again, you can move on Judd really any time for a huge profit. So there's a lot of value in that. So, and then what I've gone for here is, I guess, my short-term team. So I've got my developing players who aren't really ready, I suppose you could say. And then you've got your 4 rookies. So these were clearly the 4 rookies. And what I've gone with here, so best 22. So this is a best 22 that, well, in 2007, they wouldn't lose a game. It's just, you've got pretty much all Australian quality players, just about in every position, and a few guys where a Pendlebury, look, he was still developing, but he was still really impressive from really 2007. So just as with a Selwood was. So. But yeah, you've got the names. So Corey Enright, best general defender at that time. Brian Lake, for me, he was the best sort of key defender, really from this point onwards for me. Matthew Scarlett, great key defender, but he can play as a general defender. So again, it gives you the options where you've got 2 genuine key defenders, one where he can be a key, he can be a medium, he can play on whatever you need him to. So that really helps there. And then you've got Hodge and Shaw, well, absolutely perfect. So Hodge, well, he's captain material, long-term captain material. He's that real inspirational leader that makes everyone better. Heath Shaw, just all the run and carry, meters gained, didn't really miss games. And yeah, so he's someone that, yeah, absolutely, he helps there. And really from 2007, that might have even been his best season. So really from here, you've got peak Shaw right away. So again, Nick Rewalt on a wing. In his one season on a wing, and I've mentioned it in a previous video, well, that was probably his best season. It was as something like a 33-year-old, if my memory serves me right. He was either 32 or 33. And he took over 200 marks. He was still kicking so many goals. It would have been a 40-plus goal season. So, and if you've got that every year, well, that's pretty well maximising his game. So, and if you've got a Jonathan Brown at centre-half forward, you've got a Pavlich and a Franklin in sort of the forward 50, well, you don't need Rewald in there as well, but you want him sort of just running relentlessly and just taking marks everywhere and being that option no matter where he is. So, and then a Goodes. So again, you've got the versatility where you've got a Cox as your number 1 ruck, but who would be sort of the guy who plays the minutes where Cox is resting? Well, I would shift Goodes into the ruck as that, I guess, relieving ruckman for those few minutes. So that would be how I would structure a team like this. And you can just let Goldstein sort of develop. And when he's developed, well, he can come in and then Cox can sort of be whatever you want him to be it a tall wing, whether it's just as another, I guess, forward. So you've got a lot of options there. So Burgoyne, again, I mentioned in the previous part, but you can play him anywhere. You've got a Bartel. Again, you've got the same optionality where forward, back, obviously a great midfielder as well, so great options. Brett Harvey, look, he's someone you'd want sort of a bit more up the field normally, but just to utilise his running. But again, the delivery inside the forward 50, let him kick it lace out to your Browns, Buddies, Pavlich, perfect. Again, with a Pavlich, well, if you feel the front half is getting too tall, well, fine, put him into the midfield and put someone else a bit smaller forward. Maybe it's a Deledio, or Even a Goddard could play across half forward, a Bartel could go deeper. So again, lots of options. A Swan can play forward if you need him to. Ablett can play forward, and yeah, so Judd, Ablett, the premier mids, you got Mitchell with them, perfect. Swan off the bench, came good from 2007, kept getting better from there in those following years, so you'd want a few years from him. Brett Deledio, durable 22 game a year player for a number of years there, but again, he gives you options. Can play midfield if you want, but running off half back as a forward, just such a dynamic player at that time and phenomenal. Goddard, again, you can play him whether it's outside, whether it's off half back, half forward if you really wanted. So again, lots of options, but really great player. Such a proficient mark, but such a damaging kick. So yeah, really good piece. I'd even say a Goddard has been underrated in terms of what he's done, where on the biggest stage, phenomenal, but again, he's had the consistency over his career, and he was someone where really he was made to retire too early. Bartelli retired too early, Scarlett retired too early. So many of these guys just really hung up the boots way too early. Brett Harvey, that was really sad seeing him, I guess, forced into retirement, and he had another 2 years comfortably in him. In his retirement year, he actually there was no one that had more disposals and goals in combination than Harvey did. So there was no one that was ahead in both categories in that final season. And of course, his delivery inside 50 was as good as any. So still being on that level, that was sad to see. But yeah, he's someone where absolutely he's been such a good player for so long. You just really try and keep him. And then emergencies, so Joel Selwood. So again, he can take over from a Goddard when injured or sub in if anyone else has to miss a game. So he's that optimal really from year one first emergency, and it really puts the pressure on him early days to, I guess, work for that position, keep getting better. And I think for me that's a good position for really a first year, I guess, even champion player to, I guess, really come into and really have to work for it a bit, but still get those opportunities also, and then really be able to cement the spot from there. And then a Mundy, a Simpson, look, they were pretty good then, but probably not very good. So having them on that sort of edge of the best 22 is probably a pretty good spot where it really keeps them hungry. It tells a Simpson, look, you need to work on the contested side of your game, which was an issue at that time that he developed sort of a couple of years on from there. So it really puts that onus on him. And then from there, it allows whether it's a Scarlett or an Enright or whoever to get traded on from there once he's at a level where he's clear best 22 and he's really earned that spot. And similar with a Mundy, though Mundy was more ready then and he was already a good player. So again, second emergency, that's a pretty good spot for him given what you've already got there. But there aren't too much in terms of established players where it doesn't make it unreasonable for these guys who are young and ready to, I guess, hinder their development. But then it also allows you with all these guys who probably weren't quite there yet to really, I guess, have that time to get a little bit better and develop a bit more. So and again, once some of these guys get ready, well, it means that, well, you're surely going to be in salary cap issues with a lot of these guys on the field. And look, you're not realistically going to be able to fit all these guys into a salary cap anyway, pretty obviously given their champion status. But really, that's how you'd organise it. You'd ship out some of these older guys, and when these guys are ready, well, yeah, you can put them in, which wouldn't be how you'd normally do it. Look, you wouldn't normally be able to have that luxury, but it's just a case of, well, if you've got the young guys you know who are going to be those stars, well, it sort of gives you that luxury, I suppose. So then, yeah, you've got the 4 rookies who are the best rookies. And then from here, we have our positional distribution. So what I've got here, so there are 2 genuine ruckmen for me. So Goldstein and Jacobs. Given Goldstein's durability, I believe just having really the 1 in reserve is more than enough for me. And then I've got a ruck utility in Dean Cox. So this really gives the option where once a Goldstein's developed, well, you've got the option with a Cox to play, and whether it's wing, forward, you've got those options. And really this can serve as a bit of a guide as to how for an AFL list you could really set things up. And the one thing I'd say practically today is, well, you don't need this many in the key forward camp. It's really just, I guess, if you've got some of these guys where, look, you can play them up the ground in other positions, then absolutely you can do that sort of thing. But otherwise, look, you don't need as many of these. You could probably have 2 in some cases and then just have some that fit some of these other categories, and that would be more than enough. But just with the sheer quality of guys, where you've got Jonathan Brown, Lance Buddy Franklin, Tom Hawkins, Jack Riewoldt. Hard to argue with those guys, I would have thought. And then in terms of key forwards outside midfielders, well, Nick Riewoldt, again, it gives you really the option to have those other guys as key forwards. And then a Josh Kennedy, same story, where if you can have those guys on a wing, it allows you to accommodate really more of the premier quality and really, I guess, those long-serving great players. And then a Jared Roughhead. So he's a key forward, key defender. If you happen to find some great key defenders for whatever reason, well, great. Then you've got the option really to, I guess, put him as a key forward. Again, you could almost have him as a bit of a tall midfielder pinch hitting through there. But yeah, absolutely. You can really have him at both ends. You've got that option. So that's why I place him in that camp. And then with the key defenders. So I've got 4. That's all that's really needed. So you've got Brian Harris, as he was named, became Lake. You've got Luke McFarlane, Heath Grundy, Tom Lonergan. So you've only really got one young guy here. You've got sort of 2 older guys, one sort of mid-career guy, I suppose, who still had a lot to go. So yeah, that's helpful. And then you've got a Matthew Scarlett, whereas sort of a key defender, general defender, you can play him in either. So having that sort of flexibility of one of these types, 2 to play, and then 1 or 2 as depth, I think that's pretty good for me personally. Then you've got general defenders. So what have we got here? So we've got Corey Enright, Heath Shaw, Shannon Hearn, Basher Hooley, Jared Harbrow. You've got a good mix there, a lot of quality, and you can fit a lot of those guys into a team at a time. So, and then once a guy like an Enright's either traded, retires, well, then you can move in someone else. So that's great. Then we've got sort of general defender / utility. So again, we've got a lot of really good defenders, but again, that's the advantage, where if you don't have too many great players in sort of amongst your sort of rucks in particular, but then your key forwards, key defenders, you really want to keep those guys versatile so that you don't need too many. So then you can allow for a lot of great players that are really versatile, can fit in anywhere and fit that best 22 and keep making it better. So Hodge, Simpson, Goddard, McVeigh. You could really call Simpson a general back, but he could play wing. McVeigh, again, is more of a general back for the purposes of this sort of team, but again, you could sort of play him up the ground, even forward if you needed to, so he gave you options too. But yeah. And then sort of utilities. So these guys you can do whatever you want with. A Pavlich, you could play him key forward, key back, midfield if you want. You've got Goods. Well, again, he gives you options where you don't need too many rucks if you've got a Goods. Where, look, if a Cox is missing and a Goldstein isn't ready, well, fine, put Goods in there. He's very versatile and he's a proven ruckman. And he can still play wing, he can play key forward, you can do what you want with him. So, again, gives you a lot of options. And, again, during this time, he was great sort of for that period of years. So, absolutely, whether it's as a short-term placeholder, you keep him till the end of his career, well, great value there. Sean Burgoyne, well, he's still going around now, so tremendous value. And when you've got a veteran that's that clutch and you've got that versatility to play forward, back, midfield, you can put him on the ball in those key moments and he'll come up good. So, yeah, absolutely he's someone you want on your team. Jimmy Bartell, again, he can play in midfield, forward, back. So, great options. Deledio, again, midfield, forward, back. And for the purposes of this sort of team, you'd probably play him. Normally you'd say more off half-back would probably be his spot, but for this sort of team you'd probably have to play him forward, where there just weren't many great general forwards at this time. I could probably have included more general forwards, but when you really look at, well, how long was the, I guess, duration of their career? Well, yeah, there's probably a few where I'd just say, look, I'd prefer guys in other positions, but if I had, say, cut back on some of these key forwards, maybe I would have more space for more genuine forwards, whether it's your Stevie J's or what have you from there, who many would rightly advocate should be on this sort of team. So, but yeah, for me, he was just left off. But just because I preferred a few others ever so slightly, but not by a lot, not a lot of separation there. And then so David Mundy, well, again, forward, back, mid, put him anywhere. Best as a mid, but had success early days even in defence, so gives you options. Sean Higgins, for the purposes of this sort of team, he'd play mostly forward, but again, you can put him on a wing through the midfield and he'll go really well. And a Shane Edwards as well. Well, you can play him forward, you can play him back, you can play him on the outside. You've got a lot of options. That's great. Eddie Betts, premier sort of general forward, and when you've got so many mids that are talented as forwards, utilities who can play forward, well, you don't have to go too heavy on forwards. And you've got Brett Harvey, you've got Robbie Gray, well, again, really good forwards, but you can play them up the ground. Harvey on a wing, Gray on the inside for some periods, just to add to that, I guess, deep rotation, have lots of numbers going through there. So really you only have to have at least one dedicated general forward. Usually I'd advocate two, would be a better number. But if you've got a lot of these sort of utilities, have a really large midfield rotation, well, then it can work also. And guys like Ablett, well, Ablett can play forward if you need to, but his value is obviously as a mid. And it's the same with the Swan, where, look, particularly early days, he was actually a really good mark and an able forward, but of course, midfield was his go. That's where he became great, particularly when he could just rotate in, out, gut run. When he's tired, come off, have a quick spell, come back on, just be the Energizer Bunny. Sam Mitchell, great midfielder, has the skills, has the contested ball winning. You really need him in there. Otherwise, it's not much of a team. And it's a bit the same with a Chris Judd, where just over that shorter term period, and look, his career wound up a lot earlier than the likes of an Ablett or even a Swan. But just those early days, he was a great player. So it's hard to leave him out. But he's someone where, look, you'd move him out earlier so then you can make room for, I guess, your new players. Because every year you have to keep in mind, you have to really be adding two, I guess, or normally it would be 3 senior listed players, but you could do something like 2 senior listed players through the draft, promote 1 rookie. So you've got those sorts of options as well for a list. So, but yeah, with this sort of list, well, you'd be trading guys out. So that would be the challenge with sort of coordinating this, where it's like, well, who do you trade out when you've really got every player in every position that's pretty well optimized? So that's the challenge there. So you got Pendlebury, you got Selwood. They're probably the 2, really just based on longevity, they'll be the highest value guys. Like, you've got Ablett as well, but yeah, they're really, I guess you could call them the big 3 midfielders. Boak, well, given he's still performing now, well, he's really forced his way in, possibly even off the back of his 2020 season, where, look, still playing at that standard, still playing well, he's really made that case pretty firmly. Josh Kennedy, look, he was a slower starter, but that's been fine. He's someone where, again, so durable, so reliable, premier first possession winner. And when you've got class around him, you've got a lot of good names around him, look, he's someone where he's a really good addition. Kieran Jack, one of the better rookies. So you've got 4 rookies. So yeah, he's someone to take amongst those. And then I've gone with a few here that are unlucky. So Aaron Sandilands, a lot of people would advocate, and they'd be right to advocate him, is someone where, look, if you wanted another good ruckman other than a Dean Cox, he'd be the guy. And based on, I guess, being able to play for a number more years, you'd say, look, Sandilands has been able to last longer than Cox, so he's got that case. But for me, what holds me back slightly from having a Sandilands is his durability, where he'd be someone where he might play 12 games a year, and is that really enough? I would prefer something like 22 from Goldstein to 12 at maybe a slightly higher level from a Sandilands, but not by a lot, even sort of in those prime years. So, yeah, given that, and given Cox's versatility to allow Goldstein to just take over the number 1 ruck, Cox can step aside as he did for Nick Nat when Nick Nat came good. So just having those options and that versatility factor, that's what saw a Sandilands miss. West Hoff, he was very close to making it, but what held me out in the end was thinking about, well, you've got a Josh Kennedy, and I really thought about, would he have the endurance to play as a tall wing? I thought yes, so that allowed sort of, I guess, for that extra key forward. Whoever would have missed out, that would have been a really hard say, but having guys like, whether it's a Tom Hawkins, whether it's a Josh Kennedy, whether it's a Jack Ree, well, look, they're better players than West Hoff, so you really want one of them on a wing, so you don't need a West Hoff. And look, if you've got a good short term, look, that's fine for your relieving ruck. And over the longer term, look, you could even put a Jared Ruffhead as your relieving ruck for those sort of few percent of minutes when a Goldstein needs a rest. So, yeah, given you've got sort of enough options within your squad, look, I'd be fine with leaving off a West Hoff, but he was close as sort of that tall wing. He has the versatility to be, he's a good key forward, and he could probably be a key back if he had to. So, James Frawley, look, had I not made a last moment decision to go Jared Ruffhead key defender, Frawley was probably going to be my other key defender just for that sort of long-term team. But for me, look, he's a very good key defender, and he's been a very good key defender for a long time, but he's not that star I would necessarily want. I would prefer Jared Ruffhead for me, even as a key defender. So, but a lot of people would say Frawley, and fair enough. Paddy Ryder, look, for me, is a pure ruck. I don't love him anywhere else, but as a ruck, fantastic. Great player, unlucky from a long-term perspective, but I prefer Goldstein. I'm a Goldstein guy, where it's just, long term, he's been that greater guy. I just feel like sort of his impact consistency has been more there than with a Ryder, but not by a lot. Ryder's close and deserves strong consideration, and if you wanted that extra good sort of youngish ruck to sort of add to this mix, then yeah, he would be a perfectly good choice. Mark Murphy is high on the games total and is still playing. So, but is he in the category when you really look through these other midfielders? For me, no. Like Kieran Jack, yes, but Jack's there because he was a rookie. So, and he was one of those best rookies. So, but yeah, comparing to those other guys, is he better long term than a Boak? I would say no. He was better early, but not at the other end. So, and I was really looking with the younger guys to go for that longer term value and the better back end of the career. So, given that, Murphy missed out, but not by a lot. And similar story with Jones, whereas last few years haven't been to that same standard, and even at peak performance, he's not in the category with these guys. But lots of the games played, still going, which is a credit to him, and great clubman, leader. So he's the sort of guy you'd love on your team and as part of your team list. But when you've got this caliber of guy, look, he misses out, and yeah. And then you've got a Jordan Lewis, again, another really long-serving player, but again, is retired now, and is he in the class with a lot of these other mids? For me, just a little below. Like a Josh Kennedy, some might say is possibly lucky. Maybe some might argue a Murphy or a Lewis ahead of them. I'm a Josh Kennedy guy. Having that first possession winner, I think, is hugely valuable. When you've got that guy who can win you 300-plus contested possessions a year, be the highest in clearances as well. Having that sort of guy with class around them, look, there's huge value to having that. So, yeah, for me, he's in. And Josh Kennedy, you can even sort of put forward for a few minutes to rest. So, yeah, I'm a Josh Kennedy guy. But if there's a Jordan Lewis guy or a Mark Murphy guy, I could get that. I could see that. Grant Birchall, look, given the injury-prone sort of years recently, that's what really holds him out. But had that not happened, well, he'd be right there with your likes of a Heath Shaw or maybe a Shannon Hearn. If he was still healthy, maybe a Basher Hooley might not be in there, or maybe it's a Shane Edwards or someone else. But yeah, just given those injury-prone years recently, well, you're only as good as your availability. So you really want guys who are durable, play every game every year, or as close to as practically possible. So for that reason, a Birchall misses out. But in terms of talent, he's in the same category with a lot of these guys who are still going around. So, and his peak performance was really good. So, yeah, he deserves at least that much acknowledgement for me. Lee Montagna, look, you could fit him across half-forward, wing. Is a possible sort of short-term piece, but when I really went through the names of the other short-term guys, well, is he better than Bartel? Is he better than those sorts of guys? Well, for me, no. I prefer those guys slightly, but Montagna would have been close. He wasn't too far off. Steve Johnson, if you wanted another general forward, he would be probably the guy I'd be picking, and those that would argue, yeah, you should have Steve Johnson in there, well, yeah, fair enough. That's perfectly acceptable. And had there been another few list spots, maybe I would have loaded up on a few more general forwards just for list balance purposes. But yeah, given he's a shorter term, he's not really a short term play, he's more a medium term play. But yeah, there's guys who are still playing, and look, you can still get general forwards, you can still get them later draft. And that was another thing I was cognizant of as well, where in designing this team, having this ultimate team, well, if you look at the key defenders I've gone through, you don't need to use early picks to get them all the time. Sometimes you can get good ones early, but you don't have to every time. Same with rucks. You can get good rucks. Goldstein was a mid-draft, Jacobs a rookie, Cox a rookie. You don't need to spend early. And same with general forwards. You had a Milne as a general forward. He was a rookie, Betts, preseason draft. So again, I also took that into consideration. So that was a slight nuance on my part that I gave consideration to, where based on this, I would be betting on my capabilities, not even assuming foreknowledge of knowing who's to come in future drafts, that I would be able to load up and get a few more in those sorts of positions if I was to sort of target positional needs, be it through the draft, trade periods, whatever it is, rookie drafts, late draft picks, early picks if I had to, but I'd probably be looking more late. So it's more, it gives me those options going forward, and I'm more than covered in those positions to feel more than comfortable. So yeah, Johnson just misses out there. Nick Del Santo, great mid, can play a little bit forward too. And as those short-term guys, strong consideration. You could almost have him over a Judd, as ridiculous as that may sound, but just given he had the durability, lasted a bit longer, and still really great sort of prime performance. But looks slightly outside for me. I'd rather go, certainly for the short term, the shorter term peak performance, and Judd was better in the peak, same with Mitchell, same with Ablett, so that dictated that there. Josh Gibson, look, I could consider him over a Scarlett, and look, he had longer term value, so that's points in his favour, but shorter term for me, Scarlett was the guy, and I really like Scarlett from a leadership perspective as well. So with a lot of these sort of older veterans, I really went for leadership to really, I guess, help fast track the development, as opposed to a Gibson, where, not to say he wasn't a leader, but he wasn't really that established on that level of a Scarlett, obviously, who was very much an experienced player by this point. So I gave that element consideration there. So Robert Murphy, well, look, terrific as sort of that rebounding defender for a long time, really lasted long, great career, obviously, but look, just having, I guess, longer durations of career from a lot of the other defenders, I went with them. And look, short term, there probably wasn't quite the needs. And look, if you've got an Enright short term, that's what you really need. So, and Hodge was already good, so you had enough guys who are good. So, I didn't feel like I quite needed a Murphy, but look, close and not far off, deserves to be in the discussion. A Sam Fisher, so he's someone where, look, he actually had more games left in him than a Brian Lake, than a Luke McFarlane, than a Matthew Scarlett, and he's in that conversation for me as well. So he was unlucky as that short-term key defender not to make it. You could make the case that you could have him and these guys, and look, you wouldn't be wrong in saying that either. So, and again, for me, it came down to personal preference. But Andrew Mackie, really good defender for a really long time. So he's in the conversation. But again, there's other guys that really even just this year were still playing. So given Mackie, well, he's retired. So I just wanted that real back end still, I guess, to be able to extend that premiership window further. But again, Mackie's in the conversation if you don't mind, I guess, him finishing up a few years earlier than a few others. Darren Glass, great key defender in that short-term key defender conversation. But for me, Brian Lake's better, Luke McFarlane's better. But a lot of people would say Glass, and you've got the leadership value as well there. So must be in the conversation, really good key defender. And then Jaron Geary. So he was the only other rookie where, look, he's still playing now, and he really has that long-term value as that 200-plus gamer. But is he realistically better than a Tom Lonergan in terms of impact? Is he better than a Jared Harbrow? Is he better than a Sam Jacobs? Or even a Kieran Jack? Well, for me, the answers are pretty clear no. So, given that Geary didn't make my squad, look, if you went for long-term value and sort of thought about, well, Kieran Jack, he'd never get games in this midfield, fair enough, you could go Geary, and look, he's obviously become a great leader. But in saying that, you could just sort of flip Kieran Jack for a profit. So just trade him to another team, get some picks or upgrade your picks or whatever the case may be, and just have those options. So again, for me, I'm pretty satisfied with this team. I can't, from my own mindset, see a way to improve this further. I'd be interested in the comment section below if there is a way to improve this team, be it the short-term best 22 and the long-term best 22, and how you would approach this differently, or whether you would approach it the same. That would be interesting to hear. And let me know as well. Did you learn anything in terms of, well, where can particular types of players be picked as well? Because that was part of the purpose of this. Part of it is really, I guess, learning how much of each type you want on your list, how to cater for both short-term, long-term needs, and then understand the dynamics in the draft as well as to, well, where can you get particular types of players in the draft sort of and get pretty high hit rates and not necessarily miss out. Like it might be with a ruckman where you can get guys in the rookie draft that are more successful than guys you pick 1, pick 2, pick 3 as ruckmans. So yes. Thanks for tuning in, and let me know, how would you change my teams? Is there anything that I could have done better? And let me know in the comment section below as well. What's your favourite AFL game? Is there better than AFL Premiership 2007 in your mind? And if there was to be a new AFL game made, well, what features would you like to see in a game? Because I'd really like to see a developer be able to make a really good AFL game, but of course, due to budgetary constraints, that's a challenge. But yeah, in terms of what modes would you have, what features would you have, what things have been done well in other AFL games that you'd like to see re-implemented for a future game, that'd be interesting as well. And yeah, what list management lessons have you learned? What draft lessons have you learned? I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. So yeah, thanks for tuning in, and yeah, like and subscribe and hit the notification bell for future updates if you haven't already. So thanks guys, see you in the next video.